How are you?
Well, thank you very much.
Good. So I really would like to talk to you about what you think is going to happen in the future weeks with Andy Burnham and the likelihood of his being elected the next prime minister following Starmer's resignation, which was celebrated by most of England. Is he very much different to Starmer, Andy Burnham? And what can we expect? And will he be any better than Starmer was at protecting the Jewish community? Starmer let all the pro-Palestinian marches go on with all the globalize the Intifada and pro-Hamas and all this nonsense. And as a result, the Jewish community has been attacked freely, and now some restraints are being put in place, but not very much. Can we expect any more from Burnham, or is he a mystery?
Well, firstly, on Keir Starmer, the pressure was on him so enormously that he had no other choice but to step down. And he made that speech, and tears were coming from his because new employees would have rights from day number one, as opposed to after working for 1 year. So, in other words, if you've never worked before, you go into a job and you can't retain that information that you've been told, you would perhaps get fired, which I think is right, because you need that right person to go ahead and do the job. And if you're not capable of doing the job, this is not the place for you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, and good luck in your future. Now that person can take the company to a tribunal for unfair dismissal, even though that they were completely incompetent and they've never had any experience before. So that is also an issue with regards to business. The other thing on the front bench, Sir Keir Starmer surrounded himself with ministers. Not one of them has ever had any experience whatsoever in business. You compare that to the Conservatives or even the Reform Party people, they don't come from this political background. They didn't join a political party when they were 13 and start being party helpers when they were 15, 16, 17 years old. And then they became a councillor when they were 19 years old. And then they started to work with the party in different areas till they were 25 or 26. And then they started to run for Member of Parliament. You don't have that business background as such in many, many cases. So, and I think it's very, very important when you are the Minister of Armed Forces, perhaps if you have the opportunity to bid in the armed services, you know a little bit about that. Again, to be the Minister of Health, maybe you were a doctor or you've worked in the national health system. Same thing with education, teachers. It's not enough just to talk to teachers and talk to the health people and talk to armed people and then come back afterwards. You have to have an all-round experience. So that's also one of the issues that things don't really get done. But also the Labour Party inherited a huge, big problem from the previous government, the Conservative Party. The jails were overflowing. In fact, this Labour Party had to start letting criminals go because they just had no place to put them anymore. That's not a good sign. There's no money to build new prisons, but you have to find that money. There is an issue.
Has there ever been a time in England when that's happened before? Is this directly related to immigration?
Well, the population since 2000 has gone up. I think it's forget the number. It's a minimum of 2 million, but I've got a feeling it's more than that. I'm doing this from memory. So when you have such a huge population increase, then of course you're going to have more demands on public services like the national health system, like the schools, like driving on the roads, like going after jobs. There's huge pressure on that because Britain, of course, is only a small island and its population has increased drastically. The other problem, of course, is illegal immigration, that it got completely out of control onto the Conservatives. The Labour Party are picking that up. They haven't really managed to go ahead and make a big dent into this because there's still thousands of people, especially now during the summertime when it's so hot, thousands of people coming across on these dinghies, very dangerous, from France and from Belgium across the English Channel, one of the most busiest thoroughfares in water or waterfares, I'm not sure if that's a word, that you would be able to. So you've got a small dinghy trying to dodge all these big vessels, ships that are going in both directions, which is also very, very difficult and very dangerous. In some cases, these little dinghies have sunk, so therefore the French Navy or the British Navy have to come out. And the law is right now, as long as the Britain is still part of the human rights organization that if they are found in water and you pick them up, in other words, you're British, you have to bring them back into the UK. You go through the asylum process. That can take a couple of years. In the meantime, you have to house these people.
Oh my
But there's
gosh.
no way. There's no way of guarding them. So they're free to go out on the streets, but they're not allowed to work. So therefore, they don't have any money. So they're hanging out on the streets. Crime has also risen, not from every single asylum seeker, but a lot of them, because they are coming in from Africa and other places that they have very different values to the British way of life. So they are getting food in these hotels that they're staying at. That was very, very unpopular because the government took over a lot of hotels. Now they're trying to reduce the hotels and finding other places to put them in community centres. But in the people in the community centres, in those communities, villages and towns across the UK, that's changing their entire local community because you've got these people hanging out on the streets and they're not allowed to work. And once their asylum seeker process or application has been refused, which happens in many cases, they're not gathered up and thrown out because there's no way to put them. You can't send them back to Afghanistan. You can't send them back to Iran because that's where they claim they've come from. Where in some cases it's not true, but they've thrown away their passports. So you have to rely on what they say. So what do you do with them? They're still here in the UK, even though they've been refused asylum. Nobody else will take them. So you're caught up in this particular racket as such. And meanwhile, the Home Office has lost control of where they are. In other words, they can't keep tabs. So you've got these individuals who have been refused asylum. Their application has been refused. The case is closed, but they're lost in the system. They're somewhere here in the UK. They get very much involved in the organized crime families and the gangs. And a lot of the times, those people, it's very common today that when you want a pizza or you want a sandwich, you don't have time to leave your home. You don't have time to leave your office. So therefore, you call them up and they come to you on one of these mopeds or a bicycle. Many of them are part of the illegal trade. That's the only way they're getting money, cash money. So this is a real huge problem, not just in the UK, but across Europe.
Yes. What would it take to change the present bill that is in Parliament? How easy is it to change something that's been established for so many years?
You have to come out of what's known as the Human Rights Organization, which Britain is part of it, and various other organizations. Human rights meaning that when somebody has been refused asylum, he has a right not to be sent back. And you've got many, many lawyers acting on behalf of that individual to say you can't send him back to where he came from, or you can't send him to a mediocre country. In other words, a completely independent country. Like, for example, Rishi Sunak, the last Prime Minister of the UK, did a deal with Rwanda. So Rwanda paying them a huge amount of money, billions and billions of dollars, for them to take in these people who've been refused asylum because, again, you can't send them back to the countries that they claim they've come to. So send them to a third country, Rwanda. Rwanda will take them. But then the human rights lawyers jumped in some cases when they were on the plane, on the tarmac, ready to take off. And the plane never took off because, got them out on the basis that it's against their human rights to go to Rwanda because Rwanda's not safe and they might lose their life in Rwanda. This has been the problem. So Reform Party originally said we're going to come out of all of those organizations. They've been condemned for this, simply saying, but how can you have a country like Britain, one of the top economic countries in the world, that doesn't have any human rights laws? How would you do that to people? Now the Conservatives have adopted that particular policy by leader of led by Kemi Badenoch. She's now adopted that policy. And they believe this is the only way forward to get back control of the country. But there are many human rights lawyers in the UK. Many of them are Muslim, but many of them also come from the socialist and Marxist background. They will be fighting on behalf of these people to keep them in the country on the basis of their human rights. This is what's become very controversial. And those who believe in open borders and one big country called Europe, and there shouldn't be any borders anywhere, and anyone should have the right to cross from one place to another. And those that say, no, You can't have that. Any country that doesn't control its own borders is not an independent country. So you have to get control of these borders. And way back in 2016, Britain did vote by a margin of 62% to 52% to 48% by leaving the European Union in order to get control of the borders. But then Boris took over and it just got completely out of control because of these human rights lawyers who were refusing to allow these detainees who have been refused asylum to go back to the country that they came from. So we're in this mess as it is.
Yeah, pity we can't deport the human rights lawyers. Maybe that's the only way to go.
Well, then some people are. I mean, some of them do actually have. I mean, I remember one particular case several years ago. This was, but this is one particular case that was highlighted. So this is quite popular, and that is that there was an African from one of the countries. He was convicted of three rapes and a murder, served 14 years in jail, came out of jail, and then was being deported. The human rights lawyers came in and said, "Do you need any help?" And he said, "Yeah, I've actually got a kid now." Ah, so that's not fair on the kid. We can't actually violate his human rights because he has a right to see his kid and be with his kid in the UK, even though he's not British, even though he was convicted of rape and murder, and even though he served 14 years. So they couldn't send him to Rwanda or any other country on the basis of his human rights. So you've got to make these tough decisions, and any government does this is going to be open to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of controversy because they will be saying effectively they're taking away the human rights of these individuals. But I do think when it comes to push and shove, that if somebody comes into this country and kills women and rapes women and he gets convicted and he goes to prison for 14 years, then he should be kicked out no matter what after. And who cares about his human rights? Because what happens to the human rights of the women?
Exactly.
What happens to the human rights of the parents of that girl?
Other women who are vulnerable in his facility that may potentially be attacked by him. I mean, there's no human rights anymore for the Brits, only for the victims. And human rights has become a definition of the victim and not of the real victim, but the victimized who proclaim themselves to be victimized, when in actuality the true victim is just neglected completely and not valued. And their pain and the pain of these families who've lost loved ones is meaningless to these human rights organizations. So we have to redefine what human rights really is in order to be able to change anything. We're not going to be able to do it under these definitions.
That's right.
It's the same problem with amnesty. We have to redefine it.
But that's going to take some time. So what you do during that time is going to be debates, and it's going to be challenges, it's going to be more debates and more policies taken into committee rooms in Westminster, and it's going to be debated upon in the House of Commons, and you're going to have lots of opposition about that, and it might not even pass for all sorts of reasons. It could take years and years. What do you do in the meantime? And that's why we're in this mess for the last 12, 13 years, that it's just got out of control. That's where hands are tied behind their backs, and it's very, very hard. And those countries that are led by dictatorships, of course, they don't have this problem. They can just get rid of the people on the basis of what they don't, you're not right in this country. You're a dangerous person in this country. Out you go. On your bike, Sonny.
It's the same thing for terrorism in the Arab states. They know how to handle it. They're not viewed ever as being the poor victim as the pro-left organizations see them as. And they take care of it. They eliminate them. They know exactly how to deal with these terrorists. And you don't hear of terrorism in the Arab states the way you do in Europe. And it's not because it didn't exist. It's because they have no desire to have it in their midst. They know what it really is, and they squash the ideology immediately. And Europe really needs to look to the Arab states to have an understanding of how to deal with terrorism, how to deal with this ideology. I mean, the fact that you and I had a discussion about that the Arab nations no longer send their kids to colleges in England because they don't want them to become radicalized in colleges and universities.
That's from Saudi, Bahrain, and the UAE.
Yes. So we should take a lesson from that. But instead, what we do is we bring them in, we radicalize them, and then they stay, and then it backfires on us. So,
yeah.
so
So Andy Burnham, if he is the Prime Minister in, say, 7-8 weeks' time, it will be announced towards the end of July. In September, there comes the Labour Party conference, and he will be held, if indeed it is him. Many people in the Labour Party are hoping that there's going to be a challenger, at least one. It'd be nice for two, because, of course, right now nobody knows what he stands for. And would Andy Burnham take strong steps against this? Probably not, because he comes from the more left socialist wing. The big question right now in the UK news is who will be his chancellor? Who will be his Minister of Finance? Is it going to be Rachel Reeves? Is it going to be somebody else? Miliband. Ed Miliband, who is really far left.
Yeah.
He's the energy minister. There is some type of a connection over there. Is it going to be somebody who's more centre to the left, like Wes Streeting? Because, of course, a lot depends upon who controls the money in the UK, because business is relying on the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make the right decisions in order for business to start to have a chance to expand a little bit. But at the moment, the signs are that it's perhaps more of the same of what it is. And what others have said, what pundits have said, what analysts have said, is that it's not just a question of changing the person at the front. You've got to change the whole infrastructure and the fundamentals of what the Labour Party stands for. Unless that's going to be changed, then just changing the front man because he's got a much greater personality. And I'm sure Andy Burnham does. He does have a much bigger personality. And you're probably going to see this, if indeed he is the Prime Minister, at Prime Minister's Questions every Wednesday for 30 minutes, where he responds to questions which he doesn't know about from across the House, including the Leader of the Opposition. But nevertheless, if he's going to change the policy, if he's going to step away from the current Labour Party manifesto, he needs to call a general election. And the Conservative Party say they're ready for one next year. And the Reform Party, led by Nigel Farage, says that they're also ready for a general election, maybe next year.
Please God, I hope so. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your time and your information, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay.